Welcome to Books and Ideas Audio, a presentation of the Vancouver Writers Fest. The Vancouver Writers Fest connects people to exceptional books, ideas, and dialogue through year-round programming that ignites a passion for words and the world around us. We carry out our work on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. This month, we're delighted to share this event with Cree writer Michelle Good in conversation with Carleigh Baker, an author of Cree Métis and European descent. Michelle Good has moved and inspired millions of people with Five Little Indians, the Canada Reads winning novel that tells the story of a group of residential school survivors coming to terms with their past and finding a way forward. She joined us at the Vancouver Writers Fest on October 21st, 2023, with her latest work of nonfiction, Truth Telling, a collection of essays about the contemporary Indigenous experience in Canada, from resistance and reconciliation to the resurgence and reclamation of Indigenous power. The Vancouver Writers Fest would like to thank our public sector funders, without whom we couldn't do our work. They are the Government of Canada, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Government of BC, the BC Arts Council, the City of Vancouver, and CMHC Granville Island.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Michelle Good. Michelle Good.
How are y'all doing?
Yeah. In conversation, presented in partnership with HarperCollins Canada, the Peter A. Allard Law School, and the UBC Talking Stick Festival. We're so pleased to have you all here this evening. I'm Carleigh Baker. I'm a Cree Métis author. My family comes from Treaty 1 territory, Red River area, and my family names are Carrière and Dion. And I was born and raised in Stolo territory, in a town called Mission, and I think it's important to mention that the very last residential school to close in BC was in Mission, St. Mary's Mission, in 1984. So not ancient history at all, as you say in your book, Michelle. So before we begin, it's territory acknowledgement time, and we are on the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And that is the truth, and I am acknowledging it. But I don't really feel comfortable with with land acknowledgements sometimes, because I feel like it's often some dummy like me gets up here and sort of acknowledges the territory that we're on for everyone else's, on everyone else's behalf. And I don't think if you're here this evening, of course, Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh folks are exempt from this. You honor the land every day with your presence. But I don't want to just acknowledge on your behalf. You're here to listen. You're here to listen to Michelle. You're here to listen to the truth. So I want to just read a little something by Métis scholar and writer Chelsea Vowell about land acknowledgements. If we think territorial acknowledgements, if we think of them as sites of potential disruption, they can be transformative acts that to some extent undo Indigenous erasure. I believe this is true as long as these acknowledgements discomfit both those speaking and hearing the words. The fact of Indigenous presence should force non-Indigenous peoples to confront their own place on these lands. And that's from a work called Beyond Territorial Acknowledgements. So I invite you this evening to think about whose land that you're on. And I also invite you to think about your relationship to the land that you're on. And now something that happens to me as well, is that sometimes when we think of that, it can bring up nostalgic. I mean, look at how beautiful it is here. It can bring up nostalgic and sort of, well, I love hiking, and that's my relationship to the land. And I do that too. But this evening, I would like to invite you to think about your unsettling, uncomfortable elements of our relationship to the land here. And I think we're going to get into a lot of topics this evening that might make you feel uncomfortable. And I invite you to sit with that. And I'm not being a smart aleck here. Breathing is really helpful for that. So I invite you this evening to sit with your discomfort as we learn from Michelle, and to breathe through it. Don't forget. I forget all the time. I'm going to remember to do it right now. Okay, not into the mic. I shouldn't have done that into the mic. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce our author for tonight, Michelle Good. Michelle Good is a Cree writer and member of the Red Pheasant Cree Nation in Saskatchewan. After working for Indigenous organizations for 25 years, she obtained a law degree and advocated for residential school survivors for over 14 years. Michelle earned a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing at the University of British Columbia while still practicing law and managing her own law firm. No big deal, MBD. Her poems, short stories, and essays have been published in magazines and anthologies across Canada, and her poetry was included on 2 lists of the best Canadian poetry in 2016 and 2017. Five Little Indians, which you may be familiar with. Her first novel won the HarperCollins UBC Best New Fiction Prize, the Amazon First Novel Award, and the Governor General's Literary Award, the Rakuten Kobo Emerging Writer Award, and the Evergreen Award, the City of Vancouver Book of the Year Award, and Canada Reads 2022. Need a drink of water. That was such a long list. It was also longlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize and a finalist for the Writers' Trust Award, the Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize, and the Jim Diva Prize for Writing That Provokes. On October 7th, 2022, Simon Fraser University granted her an honorary Doctor of Letters. Can't get enough of you, Michelle. Her new work, Truth-Telling, 7 Conversations About Indigenous Life in Canada, was released May 30th, 2023, and on October 4th, 2023, was shortlisted for the Writers' Trust Balsley Prize for Public Policy. Okay, I need a break.
Right, enough about me.
Yeah, you want to read to us a little?
Sure.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming here tonight. I really appreciate the opportunities to have these conversations, because it is these conversations where Indigenous and non-Indigenous people can sit together, give thought to what reconciliation means and what it calls for, and perhaps become engaged in that process together as opposed to opposing forces, which is what I hope we can somehow achieve. So I'm going to read you the introduction to this little book. But first of all, there's a quote that I found after the book came out, and if I'd had it sooner, it would have been an inscription in the book from an unusual source from Anais Nin. And she said, "When they asked me for the truth, they were asking me for a truth a version that they could live with." Mm-hmm. And that is sort of the heart of truth-telling, is that Canadian history is a myth. The way we have been taught Canadian history is fictional, and in no way represents what actually happened in this country. And as Marie Sinclair said, before reconciliation, there must be truth. Okay, enough of that now, geez. And there is an inscription in the book from the amazing John Trudell, who was an activist who was involved in the takeover of Alcatraz Island and the Trail of Broken Treaties, the demonstrations in Washington right around the time of the I have no brain. That's okay. We'll get back to that. Anyway, he's a wonderful person, or he was. He's passed now. Yeah. And he said, "When one lives in a society where people can no longer rely on the institutions to tell them the truth must come from culture and art." And I believe that we're in that place in our world right now. Mm-hmm. So sit with me by this dialogue fire. At the watershed moment in Canadian history, when the Truth and Reconciliation Report was issued, the Honourable Justice Murray Sinclair positioned truth as mandatory and a precedent for reconciliation, articulating the fundamental principle that without truth, there can be no reconciliation. This phrase has become like an anthem in the raised voices of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people alike. The urgent demand for truth has become a call to action in itself. The problem with anthems, though, is that they tend to become rote, like an absent-minded genuflection, a premeditated land acknowledgement, reduced to the sound of the words without mindful consideration or intention to follow through. These public gestures are simply a tipping of the hat, without any commitment towards substantive recognition of the rights of Indigenous peoples to implement jurisdiction in our territories. Truth is more than fact. In Canada, truth must be unearthed from beneath the myth of Canadian history. That history must be understood in a deeply contextual way if we are to move beyond positional and confrontational relationships and into functional ones dedicated to substantive change. We must step away from the window dressing of reconciliation. We must come to a place of understanding that the colonial history of Canada was genocidal in nature, functioning as an imperative embedded in the very heart of colonialism. The conversations, academic and otherwise, about colonialism articulate its complexity, and we see work in its derivatives, post-colonialism, neo-colonialism, settler colonialism, and so on. Each of these iterations and more generate important and elucidative study. At the same time, I find it distracts from the fundamental meaning of colonialism, and it's critical that its ugly heart not be lost in the study of it. Colonialism is the policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying it with settlers, and exploiting it economically. That's it. That's all. This is the unvarnished, grasping truth of the intention of colonizing European nations that set their sights on the riches of the so-called New World. Human settlement was only secondary to the economic goal. The colonizing settlers are simply the drones in the beehive of colonial ventures, their value limited to how well they enrich the various states who finance the colonial venture. I often visualize what I refer to as the colonial toolkit, a collection of implements used to activate the aims of colonialism. All the implements in the toolkit were and are employed to remove us from our lands, disempower us in decisions about our lands and resources, dismantle our highly effective social institutions, and dismember our families and communities. To accomplish these colonial goals, there were, for example, policies established that mandated the starvation of Indigenous peoples to force their submission. To dismantle traditional family structures, social institutions, and community systems, we saw policy and law mandating the wholesale removal of children for placement in residential schools for the sole purpose of deconstructing them and reconstructing them in the image of white men. To understand the brutal circumstances Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island continue to endure, we must reach under the myth of Canadian history. We must embrace history in the way Indigenous peoples experienced it as it truly unfolded. Only then will non-Indigenous Canadians begin to grasp the true horror of what we were subjected to and how the seeds of that horror continue to sprout and take hold in our lives today. It's also imperative to understand that history does not only refer to events almost lost to the mists of time. History is also contemporary. Contextually, the history of relations between Indigenous peoples and those who settled here must be understood in the context of first contact, but also in times as recent as last year. The history of Indigenous, non-Indigenous relations is on a continuum from the beginning to now and must be understood that way if non-Indigenous Canadians are ever to grasp what the prerequisites to substantive reconciliation in fact are. To participate meaningfully in reconciliation, non-Indigenous Canadians must not only be supportive, but must also insist that the resources, natural, political, and financial, required for substantive change are generously and enthusiastically provided as needed and articulated by Indigenous peoples. Non-Indigenous Canadians must use their privilege to leverage real change. It is simply not enough to wear an orange shirt or issue empty land acknowledgements. The non-Indigenous population of this country must not only talk, they must also act. These are not academic essays, neither are they exhaustive. They are my personal take on this new world brought to us by colonialism, a world in which we still struggle to survive. These essays examine the brutal intentions of colonialism that continue to harm us, whether that be in the form of starvation policies, residential schools and their child welfare descendants, the acceptance of brutality against our women, the dishonesty of government, or the insufficiency of monetary compensation. I encourage readers to start with the first essay as it provides an historical foundation that informs the subsequent essays. I also encourage readers to consider Indigenous reality in the true context of these histories, to deepen their understanding and call upon their own compassion and responsibility to engage in these conversations beyond the last page. During momentous occasions, many Indigenous people engage in the ceremonial practice of lighting a spirit fire to engage the ancestors, so to speak. The fire remains burning day and night until the occasion is complete. These essays are intended to spark dialogue, to provide a deeper view of both early and contemporary history through the lens of Indigenous experience. Let us together light a dialogue fire. Let us keep the flame alive until the truth overturns the colonial lie. I need a Kleenex.
Do what?
I need a Kleenex.
Oh, yeah. Just one moment.
I need a Kleenex. Very subtle.
We're on that. Yeah. Do you want to wait?
No.
Yeah,
good.
okay,
Yeah,
all right.
go.
Yes. Thank you.
Grazie. Okay.
All right.
Oh, I don't know what this is all about.
No, I just did that on a panel not too long ago.
Yeah.
I think it's what we do. Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So reconciliation is not a state of mind, an attitude, or a well-meaning commentary, although those are necessary to lay the groundwork for setting things right. So just a really short question for you here. What is reconciliation then?
Yes. Well, in some ways I look at reconciliation in the bookkeeping sense. Like we don't do it so much now, but you know how you reconcile your bank statement with the amount of money that's in your bank account, okay? And, it has to balance, right? And in terms of the relationship between Canada and non-Indigenous people, it's like this. The scales of justice are like this. And in order for us to reach that balance in our relationship, certain things have to be taken from this plate of the scales of justice and put on this one. And there has to be, and this is what I think is such a challenge, and it really is a huge challenge, is that there has to be systemic change. There has to be a change in the balance of power. There has to be a change in the way jurisdiction is understood and represented, that Indigenous people can actually have jurisdiction in our territories. And that was the intent. As we understood it anyway, in the treaties. And if we look at how many people are familiar with the two-row wampum? Yay, there are some. Whee! So this was in the East, and it was with the Iroquois and the Dutch. And it's a treaty. What it is a belt made of dentalium, and there are 2 rows of white on a bed on a background of purple. And what it's meant to represent, the Iroquois discovered that the Dutch were hanging out in their territory, and so they went to meet them and to converse and to, in effect, negotiate a treaty with them about how they would relate to each other. And those 2 white rows of beads are meant to be the Iroquois and the Dutch, that they would float down the same river, but never the twain should meet, that they were equals in the territory. The Dutch wanted them to call the Dutch father The Iroquois said, "How about brother?" Right? I'm not kidding. And but that was the intent, even not just in those early treaties, but even in the numbered treaties through Eastern Canada and the prairies, was that in exchange for certain things, that the Indigenous people would permit settlers to reside and to make a living in the territory. But for whatever reason, be it greed, be it I don't know what, the non-Indigenous colonial governments chose instead to engage in a program of termination and destruction with the specified intent, as we see in the words of Duncan Campbell Scott, to get rid of, so there's no Indian department, to find a final solution. How many people would imagine that that term, final solution, originated in Canada, not Nazi Germany? True North, strong and free, right? So we need to get back, if only mentally, we need to get back to that place where we understood that we are equals, that we are not, you are not our great white father, okay? That we have a right to establish and maintain our own laws, our own systems, our own ways of being in this country, because it's ours, right? It's, we were given to this land for reasons to protect this land. And now that power is in somebody else's hands, look at it.
Yeah. Thanks, Michelle. Where do you see or how would you describe the intersection between reconciliation and land stewardship in the climate change realm?
Oh, boy.
I know I'm softballs, all softballs. Yeah.
Well, I wish that the knowledge that we had about the land was something that could be taken up by the population at large. And there are groups, like there's the Syilx people, that's the Okanagan people, that have developed a land trust. They've created a land trust, and they are using traditional methods to protect and to promote or to fight against climate change and the destruction of the worth of the earth.
Earth's worth.
But I think if we could, but I mean, it's so huge, it's so worldwide. Yeah. But I think if we could simplify our way of living, just think of the damage the automobile has done, not only to the environment, but to community living, right? Because we didn't go 100 miles for just the heck of it, right? Yeah. We created stronger, small, bonded communities before those kinds of things. But if we could, and it seems impossible, but if we could reconsider simpler ways of being and just being willing to absorb the knowledge that we've protected for millennia, right? I think we would be in a better position.
Yeah. Feel the same way about the speed of globalized news and social media. And anyways, just saying. Let me see. Oh, okay. How are Indigenous writers contributing to Canadian understanding of the truth of colonization?
I think we are doing an incredible job. I do. Storytelling is something we've been doing, all of us, since we were in the caves. It is a primal and fundamental way of teaching. And, I think of Maria Campbell and how extraordinary it was that she had a book published in the 70s. Yeah. Okay. Because there was no Indigenous presence in the publishing world at that time. And it wasn't given to us either, like other things. Indigenous people were not being invited to submit manuscripts, or, we're not being courted or anything like that. So what we did was we just set up our own publishing houses. We did. There was Thetis Books, Pemmican Press, the Gabriel Dumont Institute, Kaganance, which recently celebrated its 30th anniversary. Yeah. And we began publishing our own work. And once we did that, the big houses started going, there's something here. And then there was more uptake with the more mainstream publishing houses, and, we started to see a greater presence. But nobody can tell our stories the way we can tell our stories. And we can tell, it's through those stories and through what I think is our inherent ability as Indigenous people to teach through story that I think non-Indigenous Canadians have benefited from a knowledge that they wouldn't have had otherwise. Mm-hmm. And we have some phenomenal writers. Richard Wagamese, the wonderful Amanda Peters, who just published her first novel. Everybody read it. It's called The Berry Pickers.
Yeah.
And, just so many people that have contributed, made an immense contribution, and often at great personal struggle, because writing these stories requires us to go there. Okay, writing Five Little Indians, made me think about my mom telling me about her friend hemorrhaging to death on the playground at the residential school. We have to go into those terrible experiences and bring them back so that people can understand what's happened here. We we all need to do this. Once you've picked up a book and you think that you've garnered a different, deeper understanding, it behooves you as well to start telling stories. We've got a premiere in Alberta. Oh my God. It's like, what can I say? Right? Oh my God. Oh God. Anyway, I take a deep breath here.
Yeah.
But quite recently, in some kind of speech that she was making or something, she said, yes, we're such a fabulous country. The settlers came here and they joined forces with the Indigenous people and they created this beautiful country. And I said, what? Yeah, what? You mean applied forces to Indigenous people? That's what you mean. And, that's something that I do like to reference, is that, Canada is the Boy Scout country, right? Internationally, we're looked on as this kinder, gentler nation than the lunatics on the other side of the border. And, but our history, as it pertains to Indigenous people, is not as rosy as one might think. And I like to use this quote. My great-grandmother was the niece of Miss Muskwa, Chief Big Bear. And how many people have heard of the Frog Lake incident? 1, 2. All right. See, you guys need to do some studying. So what was happening at Frog Lake, this is around the late 1800s, and it was the time of treaty making, and Big Bear didn't want to take treaty. And there's lots of reference to him saying it'll be like a noose around the neck of my people, to be limited to a reserve and so on. And so after a brutal, brutal year, because what had happened was Sir John A. Macdonald and others had promoted the absolute destruction of the herds of bison and buffalo, and so we were starving. And they were our food, clothing, and shelter. It was like taking all of you and throwing you out of your homes, losing your jobs, all of your income, having no access to anything, okay? So we were in this very, very compromised position. So there were two stages to treaty then. The first was signing treaty. The second was choosing a reserve. And after a particularly brutal year, a winter, Big Bear signed the treaty. But he kept refusing to choose the land because of his concerns that, kind of played out. And so what the Indian agents were, they were instructed to withhold rations, even though the treaties provided that there would be rations for people because of the situation with the buffalo. Excuse me. He told them to withhold the rations until they would sign, until they would choose a reserve. And so there's this Indian agent, Quinn, at Frog Lake, and what he did was he would say, yes, you can have the rations tomorrow. So they would all come get the rations. He'd say, no, I meant tomorrow. And then, no, I meant tomorrow. And he'd make a joke of it, and he would humiliate them. These were prairie warriors, okay? These were prairie warriors whose whole raison d'etre was to protect the people in their community. So they killed him. And a couple of other people, and they took some people hostage. And so as a result of that, the Northwest Mounted Police, which was also known as the Canadian Militia, was sent out finish them off. And Frederick Middleton, General Frederick Middleton, was the commander of the militia. And he wrote this letter to Big Bear. He's a terrible writer. Okay, the entire letter is one sentence. So if I gasp while I'm reading this to you, you'll understand. Okay, so he says this, Big Bear, I have utterly defeated Riel at Batoche with great loss and have made prisoners of Riel, Poundmaker, and his principal chiefs, also the two murderers of Payne and Tremont. I expect that you will come in with all your prisoners, who I am glad to hear that you have treated well, and your principal chiefs, and give up the men who have committed murders at Frog Lake. If you do not, I will pursue and destroy you and your band, or drive you into the woods to starve. That's Canada.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and when you begin to sort of, and all of this stuff, I remember when I was first starting to research these things, I had to actually do that in the dusty archives. But all of this stuff is online. You can get archival access online. You can find all of this stuff. And if you want to re-educate yourself, it's possible. And so that's something that I really encourage people on their own to come to understand, is that it wasn't this rosy relationship that nitwit in Alberta would have you believe. And I think she actually believes it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And that's what's so horrifying about it, is that there are so many people in this country that have taken that doctored history and have internalized it, believe it, and so then they come up with, they're confronted by cognitive dissonance, if you will, right, when they hear the real story. Yeah. And that is a challenge for people to take a deep breath and be willing to accept that it wasn't as rosy as some would have us believe. Yeah.
Yeah, and it really continues to this day, doesn't it? Like I was remembering while I was reading Truth Telling about how when our current prime minister was elected, many people said to me, oh, well, you should be so happy his dad was involved with the white paper. Yeah, and which, of course, in my mind, I thought, no, I don't think so. But I went and Googled and thought, but people were very passionate about that. Can you tell us a little bit about, you write about the white paper in Truth Telling?
So this was 1969, and Pierre Elliott Trudeau had basically made a decision that we shouldn't be a distinct people, that our special status as Indians should be ended, and that, basically we would just be, his melting pot or his mosaic or whatever it is that he called it. And, what was particularly horrible about that was prior to that, Hawthorne, I can't remember his first name, was an academic, and he was commissioned by the federal government to consult with Indigenous people, right, right across the country, and to talk about or to ascertain what Indigenous people wanted, how they wanted to define their relationship with the government, with the rest of Canada. And he prepared a really phenomenal report that was in support of, what Indigenous people articulated was how they saw that relationship stemming from treaty and as a nation-to-nation relationship, not as a relationship of, father-son, right? Not as a relationship as dependent and superior. And so they took that report. It's typical, right? It never ends. And in response to that report, and of course, Indigenous people, there's an essay in my book called Lucy and the Football, okay? And it's like, that's what it's like. So in response to the Hawthorne report, Indigenous people were hopeful, right, that this time Lucy wasn't going to pull a football away, right? And, and we wouldn't fall flat on our arses, right? But, instead, Trudeau presented the white paper policy in response to that, which was an end of Indigenous status, was, just a failure to recognize any kind of Indigenous jurisdiction, and just the end of any sort of special identifiable relation or identity for Indigenous people. And so Indigenous people basically said, well, what? Right? And they, of course, didn't accept the report. And many Indigenous groups, like the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, prepared a document called the Brown Paper in response to the White Paper. And the Indian Association of Alberta created a Red Paper. And Harold Cardinal wrote, as a response to the White Paper, Harold Cardinal wrote the book An Unjust Society, which if anybody hasn't read it, I suggest you do. It has aged well. And but yeah, so this this desire to assimilate, terminate, be rid of us is not new, and it's been consistent in our history. And there's a good quote from Sir John A. Macdonald about this same context. And somewhere it's here. Just be patient with me. I'm old. Okay. No, it's not there. Nope. Oh, here it is. And it's Duncan Campbell Scott, where he says in 1918 it wasn't Sir John A. Macdonald. Oh, this one. This is it. 1920. Okay? Not 150 years ago. 1920. Sir John A. Macdonald says, I want to get rid of the Indian problem. I do not think, as a matter of fact, that the country ought to continuously protect a class of people who are able to stand alone. Our objective is to continue until there is not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic, and there is no Indian question, no Indian department. That is the whole object of this bill. And the bill that he's talking about was making residential school mandatory, attendance mandatory. But that was, and that spirit, if you will, I'm sorry to insult the word spirit, is what was underlying the white paper policy as well, is just, no Indian problem, no Indian department. They'll all be absorbed and we can just not deal with this anymore. And so, there's been a long history of this desire to just make us go away somehow. And here we are.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, yeah. So you begin the chapter on land back.
Yeah.
With some very Cree humor. No, we don't want your cottage. And it's funny because it's accurate. What is at the heart of the land back movement?
Well, at the heart of the land back movement is that there has to be a land base. And in fact, if you look at the international law definition of a nation, okay, one of the requirements is a land base, okay? Now, oh God, this takes me to the question of Crown land, okay? Right at this point, only 11% of the entire Canadian land base is privately owned. The balance is Crown land. Now, what is Crown land? Okay. Crown land, the concept of Crown land started in Britain in the 1100s when a king, I jest, but, we got to laugh, right? When a king basically woke up one day and said, only the king may own land. Okay. And so nobody owns their land. Nobody owns their land. If the Crown decides they're going to take it, they'll take it. And with Indigenous territory, even in cases like particularly in British Columbia, where there are very few treaties and the land is recognized as being unceded, which means we didn't sign anything that said any of you could even be here, okay? The way the government looks at that, and the Supreme Court of Canada has said that the Wet'suwet'en people, which is my favorite example, never ceded their territory, that they maintain Aboriginal title to their territory. So why is it then that when a pipeline is coming through, militarized RCMP are on the territory, hauling them off their territory? Why is that? Because of the way that they perceive Indigenous title or Aboriginal title. They perceive it as a burden on Crown title, okay? So it's like a lien. Okay, it's like any of you that have a mortgage. The bank has a lien on your property, so it's yours. But they can, you stop making your mortgage payments. They can take it back. It's the same thing with Indigenous or Aboriginal title. That's the legal term. Is Aboriginal title. Is that they perceive it that way? Is that if there is a conflict between the interests of the Indigenous people and the interests of the Crown title trumps Indigenous title, and so. And this is why I say that all of the systems, including the justice system, has to be changed to reflect what Indigenous title actually is, so that there isn't that trump card that's constantly being played against us. Excuse me. It's, yes, it's yours. No, it's not. The highest court in the land, to which there is no appeal anywhere else, can say, yes, your land was not ceded, but then this principle of Crown land, which is so ludicrous, basically makes that Supreme Court decision meaningless.
Yeah. You tell a great story in the book. You tell many great stories in the book. You tell a great story in the book about your mother and how, in spite of her massive accomplishments, she wasn't considered good wife material for your dad because she was Cree. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Sure.
Yeah.
My mom was a force of nature. She went to residential school. She survived. She fought to be able to go to public school and won. But the first week that she went to school, she had to be TB tested, and she was positive for TB. So she ended up spending 3 years in a TB sanatorium, from which she wrote letter upon letter upon letter upon letter, I want an education. She eventually got a scholarship to train with Canadian Mothercraft in Toronto, which was basically training people to be nannies. And then she showed me this mansion in Toronto once where she'd worked, right? This massive mansion. She worked for this family. And they took her all over the place because she was the nanny, right? So she went to New York and San Francisco, Bermuda, and she continued, and she got a scholarship to train as a midwife in New Zealand with Maori women. And this was, it was illegal in Canada at the time, so right around the end of the Second World War, for Indigenous people to get an education beyond grade 9. So she had to leave the country to get the education that she wanted to get. she was noticed, and really quite noticed. She came back. She was offered multiple full scholarships at various universities. She was presented to Princess Alice, who is the mother of the late Duke of Edinburgh, because of her extraordinary achievements. So then she's working as a nurse in a hospital in Saskatchewan, and she meets my father, who was the X-ray technician, the dashing, handsome, X-ray tech that all the nurses were goo-goo gaga over. And, they got engaged. And when my father told his mother, she took to her bed. She told him he would be disowned. She told him that he would not, he would be written out of any will, not that they had anything, that this was a disgrace that he would marry an Indigenous person, a Cree person. It was bad enough he was going to marry a Cree person, but just imagine dirty half-breed children, right? And after they got married, because of course my father was okay, right? But after they got married, my grandmother invited my mom to go to tea with her and some of her friends, and so my mom went, and she introduced her to her friends, and she said my mom was expecting my older sister, her first child then, and she introduced her. She said, "This is Martha. She's having puppies." It's not funny. That's freaking horrible. Yeah. And, she's less than human, and her child will be less than human, right? Yeah. Ooh. She showed them.
Yeah.
No, she was the one who actually cared for my grandmother, at her end of life and so on. But the question that I pose in that story is my grandmother a monster? Was she a monster? And the answer to that is no. She was a prairie woman of her day. And I speak about oral tradition as it pertains to non-Indigenous people. And you think about people like Duncan Campbell Scott, who would say things like, yeah, we know the kids die at a greater rate than they do in their villages, but that's not enough to make us stop. Okay, even when 50% of the kids were dying in the schools, right? Schools or whatever they weren't schools. And now imagine all these people that played critical roles in implementing the residential school system. Imagine what their children heard at the knee, Imagine what the children absorbed and how they learned about Indigenous people, and how that racism is just sewn right into the fabric of our families, our communities, our nation. Racism in Canada is as familiar as the anthem. It's foundational. And that's why reconciliation has to be more than words. It has to come down to, weaving a new social fabric that acknowledges Indigenous people as equal partners at the very least.
Yeah, thank you. So I knew this question was coming, so I beat y'all to it. You won't be able to ask this question now because I'm asking it ahead of time. In the midst of all the important conversation about government policies, and some allies do find it challenging, I think, to break down reconciliation into everyday tasks. I know. There's a bunch of people in the audience who are like, damn, I was going to ask that.
Yeah, don't ask it.
Yeah, no, you can go ahead. You just have to reword it. But everyday tasks they can accomplish.
Yeah.
What can you give us some examples that come to mind?
Well, I think the most important thing is to re-educate yourself, is self-education, to understand that, throughout your life you've been fed a bill of goods, and to take the step to read Indigenous writers, to research, to think about it, and to perceive the relationship with Indigenous people through a different lens. Most importantly, to really understand Canadian history through an Indigenous lens, what it really was. And I think that will open doors in people's minds, if you will, to what needs to be done to fix that. But for me, when I, It's like, just give us the dough, right? Recognize the jurisdiction that we have, our inherent jurisdiction to land. Acknowledge that the treaties were not a surrender. And this, I think, is very challenging for people because surrender, the word surrender, is in the written treaties, okay? But we didn't have conceptions of owning land. So how could we possibly understand the notion of giving up land, right? And so it was never our understanding that we were saying, it's yours now, and we're going to be, just swept off into the dustbin of history. That was never the intention. The intention really was allowing settlers to cohabit, to share the territory, to make a living, to make a home. We were allowing you. And that's a whole different perspective. So I think education is the key, but also raising your voice. Don't vote for people that are anti-Indigenous. Don't vote for people that refuse to recognize Indigenous and Aboriginal title. So many people don't vote because they say, oh, I'm just one vote. Okay, but you are one vote next to the person who has another vote, another vote, another vote, another vote. And use your privilege to insist on what's right.
Yeah.
And raise your voice. Yeah. When you hear somebody articulating ignorance, respond. Be fearless.
Yeah, right on. I want to circle back to something you read to us, because I thought this is such a great phrase. In the first few paragraphs of the book, you say, truth is more than fact. That's such a juicy phrase. Can you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, my Master of Fine Arts workshop were very befuddled by that, because I would often say that truth is more than fact. And that was why I guess using Five Little Indians as an example, as I could have written a complete non-fictional analysis about the history of residential schools, the impacts, the percentages of children that died, and, it could have done all of that, and it would have never had the impact that Five Little Indians had, because it's truth, but it's not factual. Like, it's not, a non-fiction piece of work, but it's the absolute truth. And that's what I mean when I say truth is more than fact, right? Is that truth is a principle, a notion, a higher justice, something that goes beyond, just the letter of the fact, right? So that.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm going to bet that there are a lot of questions. Last time we did a thing together, there was a lot of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up now. I'm asking folks to speak up loudly, please, and then I'm going to repeat your question so that it makes it onto the recording. I am also going to encourage you to formulate your questions with empathy and rigor, and I'm going to ask you to ask your burning question, just your burning question, so that we can get a lot of questions in if needed. We can always circle back to you. And I'm going to remind folks that a comment is not a question. And now I'm going to squint and do my best. So get those hands up if you've got any questions for Michelle, and I will. Yes. Okay, so did you grow up with traditional teachings, and how do you find that story is healing for you and for others?
Yeah, I didn't grow up on the reserve. My mother married a non-Indigenous man, and at that time it meant that she lost her status. Yeah. So I grew up in northern British Columbia, even though I am, from the prairies in my soul. I was actually conceived in Saskatchewan, so I think that counts. But I did not grow up with our teachings. And it's a sad thing, and it's something I'm exploring in the next novel. But there was a part of my mother that was so proud of who she was and who we came from. And there was a part of her, thanks to the residential schools, that felt she could never be as good as a white person. And we saw that reflected in her child-rearing approaches and so on. But I was driven from the time I was a little kid, and I'm not sure why. I think it might be a spiritual thing. I remember one day going into the bathroom. I was about 10, right? So just a little kid. And I took my mother's foundation makeup and I put it all over my face because she was so beautifully brown, right? And I think what I was doing was, would it be different if I looked the way I feel inside? Mm-hmm. And I was driven, my whole life to understand my roots, my ceremonial history and traditions, and learned that, learned it. I think every story has an opportunity for someone to take it in a way that will be healing for them. There's always something there for someone. I didn't write Five Little Indians or Truth-Telling, as a cathartic event. I just wrote these things because I had to. I really didn't. I don't feel like I have a choice. Yeah. This is something that I can say, and so I must.
Yeah. Thanks for your question. Okay, I'm squinting. I'm ready for hands. Yes. Oh, is there a sequel to Five Little Indians?
No.
Oh. All right. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Yes. So asking for some clarity on the term assimilation and the history of assimilation. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I think how I'm hearing your question is, why would someone be offended by saying you're assimilated? Okay. And I think if someone said that to me, I'd probably punch him in the nose. Okay. I wouldn't. I'm nonviolent, right? But I would symbolically punch them in the nose, right? So, because what you're saying is that you have shed your identity, that your Indigenous identity is gone, and that you've been assimilated into the non-Indigenous world, that you might as well be white. Okay. So when you're saying, are you assimilated? That's what you're saying. You're saying, have you shed your roots, your ways, your identity? And right. And, you don't have to know your traditions, your ceremonies, your history to be Indigenous. If you're born Indigenous, you're Indigenous. And, the depth of the knowledge that you have of your ways, is something that is in your own hands, but it doesn't make you less or more Indigenous. Yeah.
Thanks, Michelle. Any more hands? Any more questions for Michelle? Yes. Oh, dark laughter. Cree, it's not just the Crees, but we're real good at it. The Cree dark laughter.
We're funny people.
Yeah.
We are. We're hilarious people. And there were people in our communities whose job it was to be ridiculous, right? To, make people laugh. And because laughter is medicine, right? And if you can laugh at something, it can't control you, right? Like if you can reduce it to something hilarious, then it has no power over you, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's my therapist has spent months saying, it seems like you laugh a lot at things.
Do you want me to talk to her?
Yes, please. Thanks, Michelle. Thank you. Any more? Yes.
Yeah. Let me tell you that I am gobsmacked by the response to this book. When I published the book, my expectation was that it would be a niche book for a niche audience. I had no notion that it would just, skyrocket the way it did. But one of the really wonderful things is the feedback I get from readers. And people have talked to me about substantive change in their perception of Indigenous people because they read that book. I can die now, right? I will have left a legacy just in that. I mean, people have said things to me, like, I have been a racist my whole life against Indigenous people, right? And now, after I've read your book, I've changed how I interact with Indigenous people. I've had people say, this person said this, I just never knew, but now I'll never forget. And that is sort of like a balloon response. There are so many people that have reflected that experience to me, that they just didn't know. And why didn't we know? Well, why didn't we know was who would have put up with it? Who would have put up with it if they knew that just down the road in that Indian school, children were being brutalized beyond any kind of conception? I had clients who nuns stuck needles through their tongues if they were speaking their traditional languages, okay? I mean, if mainstream society had understood the depth of the atrocities that were happening, would they have allowed it? And so I believe that the book has influenced individuals to perceive the circumstances very differently. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So is the reconciliation train, where is it headed in the next 10 to 15 years? And what would be the moment that for you would make you feel like there'd been change?
We are indomitable. Is that the word? And the fact that we have survived, not only survived, but thrived through these generations of just horror, should let people know we're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And, seeing I remember when I first started working with Indigenous organizations, I was 18, I was a child, for God's sake. And if somebody anywhere in the province graduated with a grade 12 education, there was this massive celebration. Yeah. And now we have Indigenous people that are so phenomenally educated in virtually every realm, doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs, right? I mean, it's, authors, teachers. We are infiltrating the system, right? And I got to remember that. So, but we are. You see Indigenous people on the bench, right? Judges, Indigenous lawyers that are creating law that is more reflective of Indigenous necessities. We see, like, Wab is now the Premier of Manitoba, and I feel that we are reaching critical mass where we won't be able to go backwards because there will be too much influence within the system. Mm-hmm. And, I think in the next 20 years or so, I'll probably be on the other side. But, we are going to see more change. We are going to see a recognition of jurisdiction, and we are going to see the acknowledgement of our own land base. Yeah. And that's critical. It's absolutely critical.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Anyway, yes. Okay, what would be different in Canada if we centered Aboriginal title?
Well, I think what you would have is sufficient access to resources by Indigenous communities so that we could engage in the necessary healing on our own terms, right? That we could create our own or recreate our own institutions for everything, education, justice, healing, anything. And that, to me, is what it should look like. is, like that two-row wampum belt, right? Where you have the two nations recognizing each other as nations, but living in their own way, neither dependent on the other.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Well, as I say in the book, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no problem. Another question about land back, and essentially, should folks with property be surrendering their property? Just give it up now. You can leave your deeds at the door when you go, or.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah,
I get it. So I think what your question is should people, non-Indigenous people that own land, would that be taken from them? And I think, my answer to that is in the book, right, where I have the title "Land Back." No, we don't want your cottage. Okay, and I go back to the point that only 11% of the entire Canadian land base is privately owned. So that means that there's 89% of the entire country that's up for grabs, right? So, I think that there is sufficient leeway there to recognize, to recognize Indigenous sovereignty and supremacy in a particular area. But I think there's also the opportunity for I can't think of the word. I'm getting so darn old, I'm telling you. For shared jurisdiction, okay? For example, with the, that wasn't the word, but it works. With the Iroquois people, okay, there are 3 jurisdictions: New York State, Ontario, and Quebec. Okay, so interjurisdictional agreements, that's what I was looking for, is where there can be agreements between, say a province and an Indigenous group that we're going to share jurisdiction. And that we will have exclusive jurisdiction over ABC, you'll have exclusive jurisdiction over CDF, and that we jointly, support each other that way, and to have a shared jurisdiction. And I think that's possible because we see it happening already in the Iroquois instance.
Yeah. Okay, we've got time for one more question, one more burning question. Yes, I saw that hand. How are you taking care of yourself in the midst of nonstop white virtue signaling?
Well, first of all, I don't think of it as a burden. I think of it as an opportunity. And, as I said at the beginning, I appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation with all of you, because it's these conversations, it's the one-on-one, the one on 100 or however many you are, that is ultimately going to really make the difference. And so I don't think of it as a burden, although it can sometimes be exhausting, right? But that's what I'm here to do. And so I do it. And like I say, I don't think of it as a burden. If someone comes to me and, my mother taught at a residential school and, right, I think of that as an opportunity to assist that person on, their path of creating a different understanding. And how do I take care of myself? I write more books.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
You have been listening to Books and Ideas Audio, a presentation of the Vancouver Writers Fest. To hear more events like this one and view our upcoming events, visit our website at writersfest.bc.ca.